The two hardest cases to crack in the anime world, the supernatural nature of the Kira case with Light Yagami, and the mysterious case of Monster with Johan Liebert. Today we're going to compare the cases that were created to pursue and apprehend them, and figure out which one was harder to solve, the Kira case or the Monster case. Without further ado, let's begin. But if you enjoy this type of video, subscribe. Going for 50k, so if you enjoy, subscribe. To understand how difficult the Kira case was to solve, we need to briefly dissect Light's character. Light Yagami was a genius high school student who one day stumbled across the Death Note. Light already had a specific sense of justice and believed that those who committed crimes such as murder or theft should be executed. The Death Note would be his primary tool to rid the world of these criminals, as it is a supernatural notebook which allows the user to write anyone's name inside, and within 40 seconds they would die from a heart attack. After he had already taken 2 lives and thought it through, he had decided to use the notebook to essentially become a sort of god, and as a god, he would create a new world free from crime and suffering. However, what made the notebook so deadly wasn't the supernatural aspects of it, but Light Yagami's mind. Light was already a genius prior to picking up the notebook, and was Japan's top and brightest student. He had an almost encyclopedic level of knowledge, as well as he was well versed in chemistry and computer science. He used the former to create a trap in his own bedroom, which consisted of a drawer that had a false bottom where he could retrieve the Death Note via a pen that pushes the false bottom up. If someone made an attempt to open the false bottom through forcing it, the circuit would connect and ignite the gasoline contained in a thin plastic casing and immediately set everything on fire. It would destroy all evidence of the Death Note existing and give Light an opportunity to evade capture. Should he be detained, he would simply say he was hiding his real notebook and had a failsafe in order to destroy it and ensure nobody other than himself could read it. Light uses his knowledge of computer science to hack into his father's database and learn that L is catching on to the fact that Kira is a student, which then causes Light to use the information that the police have to change up his strategy. While this may seem stupid, as it would make it obvious to L that Kira had access to classified information, it was all a part of Light's plan, as Light intended on getting closer to L so that he could figure out his name and kill him. Light also exploits the notebook in various ways, such as tearing off pieces of the notebook and keeping them on his body so that he can write names, putting a piece of the notebook inside a hidden compartment located on his watch, and then writing names in blood via a pen using the notebook to control people, and cause them to commit suicide in such a way that their body would never be recovered, use the notebook to kill people at random times in various ways to trip up L, and quite possibly his greatest plan yet involved exploiting the memory loss function of the notebook to not only clear himself and Misa of suspicion, but ultimately succeed in killing L. I could go on, but it's clear that Light has so much versatility when it comes to using the notebook. And aside from the supernatural elements of it, it also belongs to a god of death that cannot be seen unless you touch the notebook. There have been times where Ryuk helped Light in his plans, which makes for an excellent partner, as again, Ryuk cannot be seen unless you touch the notebook, and he also can't be injured, either as things such as guns are ineffective against him. As stated earlier, Light's goal was to become the god of the new world. Although most of the series takes place in Japan, after L's death it's made clear that Kira's influence only grew. Towards the end of the series, Light states that the world needs Kira, as with the notebook, his mind, and 5 years, he's reduced crime on a global scale by 70% and even reduced wars altogether. Although I will say that people like to misconstrue what Light means when he says he'll become god of the new world. The concept of purity is one of the major focuses of the Shinto religion. A person must live a harmonious life, respectful to both nature and duty, in order to achieve a virtuous heart or soul. The process of purification itself can only be carried out through the power of kami, or a god. Kami is a tricky word in Japanese, as it denotes both what Western religions think of when describing God, omnipotent, omniscient, the almighty, as well as the concept of spirits. Within the Shinto religion itself, kami is used to mean a pure force or spirit that can be found in everything. While I'm no expert in Shintoism, and there's probably way more than me that are experts in it, there is one particular part of it that I believe pertains to Light Yagami. According to the Shinto faith, a man can ascend to the level of kami through virtue to become an ikagami, or a living god. In other words, Light's claim is entirely legitimate within the context of Shintoism. The idea of gods in human form isn't a historically novel concept in Japan either. The term arahitogami specifically describes a deity that is a human being. The Emperor of Japan was worshipped as a descendant of the Shinto sun goddess Amaterasu. So, in other words, as the most virtuous, dutiful student in Japan, Light is poised to act as the very driving force that will cleanse and purify the world with the power of the Death Note. The purifying spirit of the New World, or Kami, if you will. In any case, it's easy to see why adopting a god complex would have such an appeal to Light Yagami. Gods are absolute, gods don't play by rules, gods define morality. But it's still one thing to say words and another thing entirely to internalize them into part of your self-identity and take it to the point where you lose your way. What was originally a selfless goal that Light decided to burden himself with turned into something more sinister and darker. The power of the Death Note consumed him, and he went as far as being willing to kill members of his own family in order to achieve his goal as Kira. Light knew what he was doing was wrong, but believed for the sake of the world it had to be done. What made the Kira case so complex wasn't just the perpetrator being a once-in-a-lifetime genius, but again it was the fact that it involved supernatural elements. Being able to kill someone in almost any humanly way possible with a literal flick of the wrist made catching Light incredibly difficult. It was so difficult that Interpol had to bring in L to solve the crime. L is a high-profile case solver who doesn't even get involved unless there's millions of dollars to offer or more than 10 victims, and with the Kira case there was definitely more than 10 victims. For context on who Light was up against, Lawliet was an orphan born in England who was picked up by Wami, a well-renowned inventor who had recently created an orphanage. It's in the same orphanage that Watari raised L to become a detective, and L was definitely the most gifted child. L was able to prevent a series of terrorist bombings that would have eventually led to World War III that at the age of 8. Mastered the Wami's House curriculum, which consisted of learning multiple languages, computer science and programming, criminal psychology, forensics, and basically everything you need to learn to become as cracked of a detective as he is. And even then, it isn't everything. L used the knowledge he gained from Wami's house to raise Watari's investments by 20,000 times the original amount. L is so intelligent that it's stated to be the very same intelligence, which is equivalent of 5 ordinary investigative bureaus and 7 intelligence agencies, and by the time he pursued the Kira case, this was raised by several notches in quote. Which means Light was facing up against someone who only grew smarter with age. Light would then defeat L, but go against 2 more crack detectives known as Nia and Mello, who were L's successors. They were brought both up at the same orphanage that L was, and debatably had more potential than L when working together. And even then, Light was able to almost defeat them. It was his own arrogance and the fact that he underestimated Nia and Mello which led to his defeat, but throughout the majority of the series, Light had the advantage against L, Nia and Mello. Despite having less resources, less manpower, and arguably less intelligence than L himself, he was still able to come out on top. How is that? Well, it has to do with the complexity of the crime. The Death Note has the potential to be used in a multitude of ways. You can kill a victim anywhere from a week or even 23 days in advance, and when paired with the fact that they can die via heart attack, suicide, or any other method of murder you can think of, it becomes tricky to narrow down a suspect. In fact, had Light never fallen for the Lind L. Taylor trap, which caused L to narrow down the suspects from 8 billion to 43 million, it's possible that Light may have gone undetected. But of course, we wouldn't have an interesting series. It was Light's ego that was his downfall then, and his ego was literally the death of him in the end. But we can't ignore the fact that the murders are so complex as they have no sort of paper trail. Usually in a crime scene, there's evidence that can be found, which can lead to one finding the killer. Except again, the Death Note is supernatural, and I can't stress this enough. It's not like Light is literally going to the crime scene to commit the murder. He can stay in his bedroom and write as many names as he likes in as many cities, towns, or countries as he likes. They'll never lay back to him unless there's a pattern, which L was able to find, as most of the killings were centered around heart attacks and targeted criminals. And this was even brought up in the ICPO meeting by someone. Manipulation was also a large part of the Kira case, as Light was able to manipulate most of the world into believing that Kira was an actual god. And honestly, who could blame them? There's a so-called being that exists who can kill people with just a name and a face via a heart attack. But there was also manipulation involved when it came to the person that was Light Yagami himself. You need to remember that he was working on a task force with some of the best detectives in Japan and the best detective in the world. Well, as L was able to see through Light's charm and charisma, most members of the task force turn a blind eye to Light. This is because Light is an absolute master at social manipulation and is constantly playing a role. In the face of the task force and L, he's Light Yagami, the son of Shuichiro Yagami, good looks, good grades, and a total genius who's determined to bring down Kira. His true nature, however, is Kira, the god of the New World. Kind of like Batman and Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne is Batman. someone who will kill without a second thought as long as he sees fit, and doesn't hesitate to manipulate or use others to get what he wants. We see this with Misa, where he goes as far as to manipulate her to half her lifespan for him again in order to defeat L, manipulate Takeda through the usage of seduction to become the next spokesperson for Kira and the goddess of the new world, and constantly manipulates the members of the task force to avoid suspicion. L was able to see through Light because he was so perfect. It was almost terrifying. Light literally had an answer for everything or anything, like the anime only scene in the rain, where L asks Light if he's ever lied, and Light practically says, "I've done my best to never tell a lie that will hurt others," or everyone lies from time to time. Why would someone who's supposedly so squeaky clean and innocent have to try so hard to convince others that he is innocent? Light's manipulation went as far as to convince the world that although Kira was a god who killed, he was a force of justice, and the world needed Kira. His reign was so absolute that entire nations began to accept Kira's will, such as the United States. It goes to show how far Light was willing to go in order to have his dream realized. Light's influence was also large without the Death Note, as by age 23, he was a member of the National Police Agency under the Intelligence and Information Bureau. Prior to that, he was already known throughout Japan as the smartest and most accomplished student. He would continue to make a name for himself after scoring 100% on the entrance exams to Toho University, one of the most prestigious universities that Japan had to offer at the time. With that, we basically covered the specifics of the Kira case, such as killing methods, complexity of the crime, and the amount of influence that the perpetrator had. Whilst the monster case is a bit more straightforward, it is still as complex as the Kira case. Before I actually get into the specifics of the monster case, I need to go over Johan Liebert's backstory, as it's very deep-rooted and complex, and will shed more light on why he does what he does. No pun intended. Johan Liebert is the monster with no name, and the titular antagonist for the seinen manga series by Naoki Urasawa. Monster. Johan was born as a part of a eugenics experiment to create a superior race of humans in terms of looks and intellect. Franz Bonaparte was the sole founder behind this experiment and the nephew of Johan Liebert, which is why, from the moment he was born, he was described as being a child who will lead, and lead Johan did. His past is very traumatic. His mother gave up his sister when her sole duty was to protect her, and eventually left him too, leaving Johan isolated for quite some time. His sister returned to him, but she had changed and been traumatized. They would eventually escape their hometown and travel across Prague, sometimes being taken in by married couples, but their fate would all remain the same. Johan had been so scarred and traumatized by being left alone and witnessing his other half being taken from him that he no longer had trust in adults or higher authorities of any kind. And at the moment, they suggested giving the kids to the police, finding their original parents, or abandoning them. Johan would simply kill them and move on with Anna. This continued until they ended up at the Czech-German border and were to be found by an officer of the name of Helmut Wulff. The twins didn't have names, but a book was found on Johan that was called The Nameless Monster. The boy in the book was named Johan, hence how Johan gained his name. And Wulff just decided to name the girl Anna. Wolf's mistake was sending the twins to different orphanages. Anna would be sent to Orphanage 47, and Johan would be sent to Kinderheim 511. It's here that Johan experienced the true horrors of humanity in Kinderheim 511, as he was drugged, abused, and placed in a program to create perfect soldiers. Johan wanted to escape as his memories of Anna were fading, as well as his own identity. He had taken up so many names, he had no idea who he truly was. But the only issue was the drugs. They constantly put him to sleep and made him forget. But eventually he developed a resistance to the drugs and awoke from his slumber. Johan then formulated a plan to capitalize the hatred of the orphans and project it onto the adults, which would cause an uprising and result in 50 children and 50 instructors to fight amongst one another and kill each other. As Johan simply watched from a chair as the fire he put burned endlessly, Johan would meet a boy in Kinderheim 511 by the name of Christoph, who he'd formulate a 10-year plan with. He would then find Anna again, and the two would travel, and eventually being picked up by a couple with a rich background in Germany's economy by the name of the Lieberts, hence how Johan gained the last name Liebert. Whilst this family truly loved him, they made the mistake of letting the monster, quote-unquote, within their home. That monster being Franz Bonaparte, the creator of the eugenics experiment. The twins appeared on TV with their surrogate parents, and Bonaparte was watching, but he had no malicious intent. He only wanted to see the twins and visited them while they were asleep. However, Johan was awake. He would take a gun kept in the house and shoot both of his parents and attempt to hide the evidence as usual. But Anna was also awake. She found out what Johan did, and Johan believed he was beyond forgiveness and told Anna to shoot him. Anna would shoot Johan, but he'd live. Johan was saved by Dr. Tenma, who chose to save his life over the mayor's. Johan had been reborn again, and to repay Dr. Tenma, he would poison the chief officer who fired Dr. Tenma and kill him, resulting in Dr. Tenma advancing his career. Johan would escape the hospital with Anna, give her to a loving family, and begin his plan. This is where things take a turn, and Johan begins to become active around Germany. Johan's first initial plan was to destroy humanity and be the last one standing, and to do this, he would have to amass as much influence as he could so that he could destroy everything more easily. He began by creating a money laundering business which became heavily known in Germany's underworld at the age of 15. But he became bored with it and took enough money to get by, and left the rest for the others to fight amongst. From here, Johan would use this money to hire serial killers to commit murders. The exact murders were people related to Johan's past, the many former foster parents who took him in. Johan doesn't have access to a death note because he honestly doesn't need one. Having a death note would make him even more cracked. What makes Johan such a successful serial killer is the fact that he weaponizes his words. He manipulates others to do his bidding, whether it be using money, emotional manipulation, his looks, charm, or even charisma. No matter what, Johan finds a way to use himself and his words to his advantage. He does it in such a way that rather than carry out these murders himself, he gets others to do his dirty work for him. The murders aren't complex like the Death Note, they are simple murders. Shootings, stabbings, hangings, anything goes. The way in which Johan manipulates people to kill doesn't have specifics, as long as it's something that doesn't trace back to him. He then disposes of those people when they no longer serve any use to him. And due to Johan's genius intelligence, he's able to wipe away any trace of his existence. Though to be fair, nobody in the public eye would know that Johan existed, aside from the eugenics experiment and the Red Rose Mansion, with the former being cancelled, and the latter being burned down. There's barely anybody who's alive that knows he exists. Johan is so charismatic, he can brainwash genuinely kind-hearted people and turn them into the most cruel and cold-blooded killers in the series. He's so charismatic that a firm group of people believe that he's the next Übermensch, reincarnation of Christ himself, or leader that rhymes with Hitler. His manipulation is so potent that he can manipulate a sane police detective to suicide, all through reminding him of the murder he committed and the sin he's left behind. Before feeding him into his addiction through the use of alcoholism, Johan is such a terrifying antagonist, not only because of his intelligence, knowledge, or abilities, but it's because of his mindset. Johan is, quite simply, a nihilist. He sees no meaning to life, no purpose of living, and decided to make his own rules, commit his own actions with no care for morality or right or wrong. Basic logic doesn't apply to Johan, which is how he's able to kill with seemingly no remorse. His mind is so warped and beyond comprehension that he can say he doesn't exist with a smile on his face. Of course, there is far more to Johan that meets the eye than all of this, which is what Johan is at the surface. I'll be doing a more deep analysis on Johan's character, ideology, and actions in the series, but this is all you really need to know right now to understand Johan. What made Johan so difficult to catch was the time frame of Monster, as well as who the detectives were up against. Monster primarily takes place in Germany throughout the late 90s, and technology back then wasn't as advanced as it is in Death Note. Such things as cameras, live recordings, wiretaps, or anything that police would usually equip themselves with to catch criminals did not exist. It's also important to mention that the concept of a human being existing out there who leaves no trace of themselves sounds outright delusional. But Johan is so perfect at concealing his existence and true nature that a detective as smart as Lunge was so convinced that Johan didn't exist. When Lunge investigated the dorm room that Johan stayed in, he outright said that nothing existed here. And it literally looked that way. Everything was as it should be. There was no evidence to suggest that human life once existed in this dorm room. And it's also why Lunge was so determined to prove that Johan was Tenma. There was literally no proof to suggest that Johan was real, as he left nothing of the sort around his crime scenes. And even if he were to leave behind something like fingerprints or DNA, Johan was a part of a top-secret eugenics experiment. He had no registered background or identity, and the public identity he had was a made-up one. The only thing to prove that Johan existed was Tenma's words, which just made him sound crazy. Johan is also a genius at anything he attempts, as he's at the top of his class in university, is praised at being perfect at all forms of study, and learned English, and French, a language that wasn't even his native one, in less than 13 months. As I stated earlier, Johan's goals changed throughout the series. Originally, his first goal was to be the last human standing, but this goal changes once he reads the nameless monster in the Munich library, which reawakens his memory. He then changes his goal and decides he's going to find Franz Bonaparte and kill him by reenacting the Red Rose Mansion massacre in the small town of Ruhenheim, where Bonaparte is revealed to be staying. He would then conclude everything by committing the perfect suicide by killing anyone who knows about him or his past. This goal initially started in Germany and would have spread amongst the entire world, but he changed his goal and decided to get rid of Franz Bonaparte. The perfect suicide, quote-unquote, is a complex one for fans of Monster, and for good reason. But you need to understand why Johan would want to erase himself from existence. He had no name, no identity, and it was his only reference point to how a human being should feel. All he had was the story of the nameless monster, and he had to choose which monster could he identify with. Which monster could he deeply resonate with? The one that accepted their identity as a nameless monster and embraced it, or the one that wandered aimlessly in search for his true name? Which was tragically a mission doomed to fail, since he was nameless after all. His identity is that of a nameless monster. His search and efforts to assimilate a name for himself are useless. In order for that name to exist, to give you a sense of self, happy memories or at least some form of sort of memory must be attached to it. Ideally, hearing a person that matters, use it in relation to you. But Johan had none, due to the countless experiments at Kinderheim 511 and the Red Rose Mansion. The perfect suicide is inspired from the final passage of the book. Please remember, Johan always said that he did not exist. He wants to make that true, because that will finally give him an identity. He will truly no longer exist, not physically and not symbolically, through the memories of others. The suicide would complete him. And if you want to check Johan's goals and this pursuit of changing these goals and stuff, I have an analysis right here with a very, very interesting title, which you'll understand as I go into the video. As stated earlier, Johan's greatest strength and the sole skill that made his murders and crimes so complex was his manipulation. Johan can intuitively and perfectly assess anyone's psychology, behavior, and motivations. He sees their mind and soul at first glance, allowing him to perfectly predict what people will do and how to manipulate them. He has perfect observational, perceptive, and analytical, calculating, tactical, and deductive skills. These allow him to perfectly predict, understand, and control anything, no matter how simple or complex, easily. These skills, along with his charisma, allow him to create convoluted plans and control anyone into doing what he wants easily. Johan leaves such a strong impression on people that he is able to convince legions to commit murder, play suicide games, or do other monstrous things after just a single encounter. According to Lunge, this process is done by altering the fulcrum of someone's identity, like removing a map's coordinate axis. The more jumbled their lines become without that foundation, the more room that Johan has to redraw or redefine their maps in any way he sees fit. This, combined with Johan's intellect, is what makes him such a dangerously charismatic criminal. His influence is also nothing to gawk at. There were 2 points in the series where he had amassed massive influence. The first was when he was a teenager and created the Underground Bank that Germany's underworld used for money laundering. The second is when he was following through with his original plan to be the last remaining human. He initially planned to get close to Schuwald and become his successor, and Schuwald was a prominent figure in the European economy. Essentially, Schuwald is one of the richest and most influential men in Europe, so if Johan would be able to manipulate him, which he initially did, he would be able to destroy Europe's economy and start a war which would lead to the doomsday. Johan targets Schuwald to take his money and influence. Johan isn't motivated by greed, he simply just needed Schuwald's money and influence to take for his own goals. Johan's charisma, as I stated earlier, is also one of his strongest abilities, as he's able to create loyal, submissive, and downright obedient allies who will murder and commit various atrocities in his name. Overall, his influence spanned throughout Germany and would have been global had he followed through with his original plan. So which criminal case is harder to solve? The Kira case with the sole perpetrator being Light Yagami, or would it be the monster case with Johan Liebert? Well, it would be the Kira case. Yes, Johan is far better in manipulation than Light, as I stated numerous times. What made Light so hard to catch was the lack of proof, due to how otherworldly the Death Note was. The Death Note stems from the Shinigami realm, with the same realm hosting multiple gods of death, and a Shinigami king who oversees it all. These Shinigamis can not only aid the users of the Death Note in certain areas, but even give them power via the Shinigami eyes, which would allow the user to see the true name and lifespan of anybody they look at. The detective on the case was far smarter than Light, and far smarter than anybody in the monsterverse, and would still lose to Light due to how many unfair advantages Light had. He had 2 notebooks, Shinigami eyes via Misa, 2 gods of death, and initially regional influence within Japan. L had more money, resources, manpower, and brains, but all of that meant nothing to the supernatural. L's successors almost lost to Light, and if not for his arrogance, Light would have won. We also need to consider the timelines for each series, as Death Note is more modern. Light had to go through much harder conditions in the form of a crack detective who could psychologically profile someone he had never even met, and also deduces the method in which Kira killed. But he also has to deal with things such as cameras, wiretaps, and even then, Light was still able to prevail. If things such as cameras existed in Monster, Johan honestly could have been caught by episode 29 or chapter 55 to 56. Think about it. There's no way Johan would have got away with leading Richard Brun to drink to his death. He was at a bar, walked past numerous neighborhoods and streets, led him up to a tall building, and gave him a bottle to drink himself to death. Do you know how many cameras would have seen the two, let alone eyewitnesses? Not to mention Johan was on live television at the time of the library burning in Munich, which would have also been used as evidence against him. I could also go on, but it's obvious right now. Johan had the advantage in time period and also not having a public identity, whereas Light had the advantage with supernatural elements. The Kira case was harder to solve, and it's even stated in the A Kira story that Light existed during the year of 2017 to 2019 and had gotten the Death Note all over again. It was agreed upon by Minoru and Ryuk that he would have simply adapted to the current state of the world and continued to go undetected in his killings, showcasing just how much of a genius Light is. Now, that could be also true for Johan, but we don't really know. There's no statements or anything, but you could assume. Minoru, someone who's less intelligent than Light, was able to evade capture and succeed in his plan of selling the Death Note, despite how much security had increased, and he also went up against an older and more experienced Nier. While yes, Nier didn't go as hard on catching Minoru as he did against Light, he still would have wanted to apprehend and meet him if Minoru slept up. But he never did. Minoru was able to use the Death Note without killing anybody and change Japan's economy. In conclusion, the Kira case is far harder and difficult to solve unless you're L, Nier, or Mello. And the monster case is more complex due to Johan's character and manipulation and the way he uses murders in the series.